In 1978 to 1983, an American TV show was aired called Taxi, and they showed 114 episodes. Very funny stuff, has aged very well. But one of the episodes I'm going to talk about in depth today. This episode was the 77th episode, and it aired on January the 7th, 1982. And it was called I Want to Be Around. It is online, labelled as Louie's Survival Bunker. There is a link in the description. I suggest you watch the whole thing, because I've edited this and most of the comedy has been removed, and some of the comedy is very, very funny. You have to watch this in context. In 1982, the threat of a sudden nuclear war with the Soviet Union and America was extremely real. Very, very real. But has the ideas explored in the episode aged well? Well, let's find out, because it's now over 40 years later. If one person knows that you have a storage facility with a lot of food in it and survival gear for SHTF, and SHTF happens, expect everybody to know it. For this reason, you hide and you cache a large amount of your actual supplies so nobody can find it, even if they're looking for it. Now bear in mind, they will torture and kill you and your family to get that information. People will do extreme things in extreme circumstances, so plan accordingly.
Alright, I got...
Fascinating. Inflation? Come on. Well, nobody's saying that anymore, are they? Inflation is now a very direct threat to all of our economies. Murderers on the streets? Well, mass shootings and knifings are quite common, although they're very uncommon and unlikely to happen to you. However, in 1982, they were feeling the effects of lead in petrol. Lead in gasoline absolutely caused retardation and violence. And we know that now because when we removed the lead, eventually, it actually reduced violent crime massively. Well, criminals control all of our governments now. The politicians and the police support each other, and they work hand in hand to keep the elite safe from us. They gloss over it fast, but nuclear Armageddon was a very direct and serious threat in 1982. And I would argue that surprisingly and unfortunately, it's back again as a severe threat in 2022. Not as bad as it was in 1982, but we're getting there. An epidemic? It means a pandemic. Of course, we've all been educated over the last 3 years about all of this stuff. Those of you who aren't nurses, I'll just say that the current pandemic is still going on. It kills about 400 people a week in the United States of America, but you'd never know it. And the other issue here is that there will be future pandemics, and some of them may have dramatically high death rates. Class warfare? Well, I'm English, so I know all about class warfare. It's morphed in the United States into left versus right, and both of them are useful idiots for the people in charge. We won't get into that. But I would point out to you, in the context of 1982, class warfare is kind of code for race warfare.
An end of the world as we know it.
It's an old phrase now, but a good one. The end of the world as we know it. So our world, as we see it and know it and understand it, suddenly ends. Doesn't mean the world has ended, but on an individual basis, it means you and your locality, the world has effectively ended. Society has stopped.
If that were to happen, then no one would survive.
Oh yeah? Someone would.
A common and popular idea, but simply untrue. The idea that if there's a sudden nuclear war, you'll go out in your garden with a beer and be irradiated and not feel anything, simply not going to happen. At best, you're going to get a severe case of radiation poisoning, and at worst, you're going to not die and your skin will all be flaked off and your eyeballs are melted. I would plan, if I was you, not to be killed instantly in the first outbreak of a nuclear war. If you're lucky, you might be, but almost all of the casualties and deaths will happen after a small to long period of absolute agony.
Welcome to Louie's Doom Room. This garage was built back in the days when they knew how to build buildings.
Yes! And this is before climate change was really a thing. Basements in New York City and other areas flood regularly now. But Louie is correct that modern buildings are not very stable and not very good to protect you from a nuclear bomb. Old ones aren't either, but they have more chance of survival. What he hasn't got that I could see in his bunker is really heavy-duty escape tools to self-excavate to get out of the bunker if the bombs go off. Nobody's going to dig down to rescue you. Being well prepared, Louie is well prepared, but for 4 people he hasn't got quite enough food, but he's got a lot. Hasn't got anywhere near enough water. Nowhere near enough water. And one little gravity water filter, that's a choke point. You need at least 2 or 3, and you need different models, you need to be able to use them. That generator is going to need a lot more diesel than gasoline, and bear in mind that gasoline actually goes off within a year or 2, and it also needs to be very well ventilated, although I'll die of carbon monoxide poisoning.
My radiation-proof suits.
This is the only part that's not really achievable in 2022, and is actually a bit silly. But
This must have cost you a fortune.
What good is money in a bank, Nardo, when you're a radioactive pretzel?
indeed. But then 40 years went by and almost all of the stuff in that survival bunker would be useless now. Some constrained and reasonable annual spending on prepping is a great idea. Spending a large amount of money on it in the mistaken belief the world is going to end very soon. It's something that's been going on since humans became intelligent and were able to purchase things. On a big channel recently, Full Spectrum Survival, I saw somebody ask if it was actually worth having house and fire and car insurance. Yes, it is. Until and if bombs drop, you better have good insurance. First two things of prepping is have adequate insurance. The second thing is to have adequate health. You need to work on that. The third thing, and I would add a third thing because we like threes, is not having a debt-fueled lifestyle. But Louie spent thousands upon thousands here, and that's clearly a waste of money from our perspective in 2022, looking back to 1982. If it had gone off, he would have been smart. It didn't go off, he wasn't that smart. But who gets into Louie's bunker?
First of all, there's Jeff. I need him to convince the black hordes I'm cool.
I'll do what I can.
But what he's saying here is, you know, there's a lot of black people in New York and I'm white and I don't think they'll like me if our society ends. And he might well be right. But you live near large numbers of First Nations. You may not see them day to day, but you may have a lot of First Nations where you live. The normal rules of society and privilege and power ends as soon as society ends. Be aware of that. Have lots of good local networks across all divides. And don't have much power or authority now. Really don't expect SHTF to fix that. It won't. If you're a loser now, you'll be a loser when the bombs drop.
Well, when the Holocaust comes, who's going to be the fourth member of your survival squad?
Please, boss, let me join.
You'll never know the difference.
Oh, but Iggy will know, and Iggy will do everything Iggy can, and his friends and anybody near him, to get into that bunker and use it in SHTF. Don't expect people just to go away and die because you bought something or it's on your land.
For Armageddon.
The guy is a terrific writer.
There's also that myth that society falls and everybody becomes a cannibal and it's terrible. 9/11 did show what happens in a sudden catastrophe in New York City. Community, informal links, people taking risks to help each other. On and on it went. Crime just plunged for a while. And people in Canada opened their homes and their hearts and their money and their wallets and their showers and their toilets to random Americans. People generally will react very, very well in SHTF. This book is about the only thing I could find that might be around 1982 that actually refers to Armageddon. It's a book, not a booklet. It actually was pretty popular. I'm going to get it, I think, and read it.
Look, keep your nightmares to yourself, Lou. I think it's about time we go to Mario's. Come on. Yeah. All right, fine. Go ahead, Tony. Go ahead, tell him. Tell him what you think of his ghoulish little, morbid, cynical little plan for doomsday.
Most people will absolutely refuse to discuss Armageddon or apocalypse, and there's very good psychological reasons why they won't. However, I do agree with Tony Danza here. The untrained, unresearched expert in prepping, you find them everywhere. People who vastly overestimate their intellect, but believe they know what they're doing and what should be done. However, Alex does have a point here about simulations. Can you imagine 2 days in that bunker? It'd be a bit tough. The toilet would smell. You'd have to actually poop in there. One of the things I've been thinking about is actually running a few simulations up here, starting probably in the winter, where I'll actually grab stuff like an emergency pack and head out into the bush for 2 or 3 days and see what happens. I don't want to die, and it would be for fun and practice, so I might do that. If you don't actually practice something, you just read about it or buy to fix the problem, you're not really getting it. The other thing, of course, if there was a sudden massive nuclear war, it's going to go on for a lot more than 2 days. They'd have to be in that shelter for at least 2 weeks, and I would say if they could manage it, to stay there for 3 months would be a really good idea. That would take a lot more water and a lot more ability to constrain their pooping than Louie's going to set up for. If you have the space, you have the money, you have the interest and the time. Aim for 3 months underground without ever coming up is a good idea if you live in a city. Well, that's it for me and my tiny terrier and the dogs outside. I hope you enjoyed it. I do recommend that you go to YouTube and watch all of Taxi. Have a great week. Don't worry about Armageddon. Doodles. It's an old phrase now, but the end of the world as we know it. It's an old phrase now, but the end of the world as we know it is a good one. What it means is for me... Wolfie, stop it! It's an old phrase now, but what it means is that the end of the world for... This has been a Wolfie Terrier Stuck in a Laundry Basket production 2022.